It's great to be back at BirdFair. Originally when we planned this event it was to come, we thought, before an election in the autumn, but obviously we had the snap election in July and we've now got a new government and we've got a lot to discuss as a result of that in the next hour. So what I want to do is just bring on our speakers and I'll bring them on in this order. So first of all we've got Will Travers OBE, Executive President and Co-Founder of Bourne Free. Thank you. Is a charity I've had the privilege to work with for 10 years. Yeah, you just want to go from the right there. So I can't think of any better person to have with us today than Will, a real influencer and thought leader on protection of wildlife at home and abroad. Our next speaker, again, probably needs little in the way of introduction from many of you. It's Bourne Taylor, who's a nature author, campaigner, and an incredible voice for getting Swift boxes in new homes. And God knows, if Labour want to build 1.5 million new homes, they need to put a Swift box in every one of them. So let's welcome Bourne Taylor. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is someone that's influenced a debate that I think had a major impact on this election, like no other when it comes to the environment, and that's the state of our rivers and our coastlines because of sewage entering them from our water companies, but also from the farming industry as well. Let's welcome James Wallace, CEO of River Action UK. Thank you. And we were to have Mary Colwell with us today, who's an incredible author and campaigner and someone that's worked so hard to get a natural history GCE into the curriculum, and there's a lot more work to be done on that. Unfortunately, Mary's not very well today, but she has a very good stand-in. She has Roger Morgan-Grenville with us today. Roger's a soldier, a businessman. He's a chair of the trustees of Curlew Action. He's a leading figure across a wide range of charities and organisations in the environment and military veteran affairs. So let's welcome Roger. Thank you very much. Now, just to sort of set the scene a bit, because I was a Liberal Democrat candidate in the last 6 weeks of the election campaign for a new seat of Buckingham and Bletchley, where I've lived for 23 years. So I sort of took the step as someone who's worked around politics most of my life, working with MPs, cabinet ministers, in and out of Downing Street, in the select committees and everything. I thought I'd give it a go. I wasn't going to win in the seat I stood in, but I learnt a great deal about being a candidate. I enjoyed the hustings, I enjoyed the engagement with people up and down the constituency, and very socially economic diverse constituency it was. But a lot of things frustrated me during this election campaign. Firstly, millions and millions of people deeply care about the environment, but most of the candidates that were selected by the political parties had little knowledge and, to be fair, in many cases, little interest in the environment. Many of them were schooled and prepared by their parties to be focused solely on social economic issues. Yes, we've just heard at the beginning that it was great that we've got 4 Green MPs as a result of really focusing the Green Party's efforts in key constituencies, not least those where there are rivers and pollution issues of concern. And the Liberal Democrats, to be fair, as a party, and I stood for them, I think had some really good stuff in their manifesto on river pollution, on broader environmental issues. And the Labour Party too, on climate change, on biodiversity protection, on animal welfare. But even in some of the leaders' debates, the issues of climate change and nature never came up. We have the Restore Nature Now march that was organised many, many months before the snap election that fell literally weeks before polling day, which was the biggest public protest of the election campaign and the biggest environmental protest ever held in the streets of London. Brought over 80,000 people together, and the BBC didn't even cover it. Channel 4 did, to be fair, and other broadcasters did. But that tells us the problem that we have. We have a great gap, a void, I would say, between the expectations and concerns of millions and millions of people in this country about protecting nature and what politicians feel they need to do in terms of delivering economic growth to make us all feel better. But if that economic growth comes at the cost of what's left of our wildlife, at the cost of what's left of our biodiversity, if it makes climate change worse, then none of us are winners. And that's the key issue, I think, that I came away from that election campaign with. And I'll say this before I bring in my panel. Ultimately, the Labour Party in government is a good thing for many of us because we want political change. But we can't treat the Labour Party as our friends. They are a government. They're going to take some decisions that we will agree upon. But they will take many others that we will not. And we will have to fight just as hard, and maybe doubly as hard as we did with the previous government, to get our message across. And I'll give you a few examples to think about. The Labour Party put in its manifesto that the badger cull was basically scientifically ineffective. Yet they are probably going to continue culling badgers on the current licenses for another 3 years, probably at tens of millions of pounds worth of taxpayers' money, and it'll kill tens of thousands more badgers. That's just an example where the policy is wrong. We have significant concerns, and should do, about planning laws and regulations if they're weakened to build large numbers of new homes, and God knows we need them in this country. But we need to protect the land and biodiversity that we have. And we are going to have to take much tougher action with the farming industry. Yes, food security is vital. Yes, farming is vital. But there's a lot of damage that's being done to our environment by the use of pesticides, by industrial farming practices, not least river pollution, that we're going to have to tackle. And if we want a real ethical trade policy, then let's just think about what we do abroad in places like the Faroe Islands, where we allow the Faroese, a population of 48,000, to sell £970 million worth of fish to us last year. We only sent £32 million worth of goods the other way, but they are killing whales and dolphins at an unprecedented rate in the most barbaric way possible. Yet the last government wouldn't suspend the trade agreement, and this government don't seem to want to do it either. So those are just a few examples of things I'm working on that I'm deeply concerned about, that we're going to have a lot to do in the next few months and years ahead. But that's enough from me. And I want to bring in our panel. I'm going to ask that each of them to give you 3 or 4 minutes of their views of what they think the election campaign meant to them, and the challenges that they feel we face as the environment movement dealing with a new government going forward. And then I'm going to bring you in. I've got about half an hour in the programme. I want to get as many questions as I can from you as well, because this is just as much about you as it is about our views. So I'll start with Will. Over to you. What's your views on where we are at the moment?
Okay, oh God, that does work. So, hello everyone. How wonderful to see you here. This is my first BirdFair, and I'll be back because it's absolutely cracking. Fantastic, so many people. Nice to see all of you. Nice to see one of my trustees is here today as well. Dominic's always a hard act to follow, isn't he? Because basically in about 2 minutes he nails everything. And then you're thinking, now what do I say? But I do have some thoughts, so I've scribbled them down. So yesterday, or the day before, I started making a list of the many, but not all of the things that we need to fix. Health service, education service, transport, energy, climate, cost of living crisis, judiciary, immigration, prison service, defence, housing, finance. You'll notice I haven't even got to nature and the environment. So then I thought, well, I'll make a second list just about nature and the environment. And again, this isn't exhaustive either. Sewage in our rivers, lakes, streams and seas. James, I'm sure, will nail that later. Toxic chemicals poisoning our bees. Oh no, wait. I know that there was a proposal now that the government will ban that as of yesterday, I think, which is good news. I see somebody nodding, verifying my fact check. Where are the homes for swifts? We're going to hear about that. Plastics choking our shorelines, marine dredging for fish, absolutely trashing our seabeds and marine ecosystems. New developments for North Sea oil fields. Oh no, wait. That's been stopped as well. That's another thumbs up as far as I'm concerned. New coal mines. Government says they'll stop the new Cumbria coal mine from opening, preserving the integrity of protected areas that are always under constant threat. I live in an area of outstanding natural beauty. Please don't mistake that I'm a NIMBY. But they wanted to drill for oil on the Surrey Hills in an area of outstanding natural beauty, put in a 130-foot tall exploration tower and bring 800 heavy goods vehicles up a sunken Roman lane to do it. That was stopped, to be fair, by the previous government. Protecting iconic species, Dom's already mentioned the badgers, but what about bitterns, what about hares? End the import of exotic hunting trophies. It's been promised into Tory manifestos. There's a new pledge from the new government. Ban the brutal, indiscriminate cruelty of snares. We need a pandemics treaty. We need to end wildlife crime, which makes me wonder why the Met is disbanding its tiny 4-people wildlife crime unit, prioritising nature protection as part of our international development investments. We could make, instead of making our international trade investments contingent on people buying necessarily British tractors, we can make it more about conserving and protecting natural spaces for the good of all the planet, closing loopholes in the Hunting Act, ending trail hunting, ending the keeping of exotic animals as pets, identifying priority species that can't be cared for properly in zoos, like elephants and big cats and giraffe and primates and polar bears, and phasing them out over time, introduce effective sanctions to pressure countries that kill pilot whales and dolphins. Dom and I have talked about that until we're blue in the face. Protecting 30% of our terrestrial and marine environment by 2030. I'm sure you can all think of lots more things I should have added to that list. Tons more things that could be on that list. But if you want to capture it all, I think Restore Nature Now is actually a pretty good slogan. It's a pretty good slogan because it's active. It means doing something. The question is, how are we going to do it? And it's going to be doubly difficult when the public finances have been stripped and there's simply not enough cash to go around. Now, the government can play its role, bringing in effective laws, rules, regulations. The business community can do much more, given the right combination of incentives and penalties. And we, you, the public, can do more if we're given the information we need to make better decisions. You'll be pleased to know this page is very short. We don't just need a whole of government approach, which I might touch on later, but we need a whole of society approach. This really is the last chance saloon. We all have to lean in. We all have to get engaged in these issues and make decisions in our own lives, all the way up through our families, our schools, our communities, our villages, our towns, our cities, our counties, our government, and on the international stage. The Prime Minister's announcement of the establishment of mission delivery boards, if you haven't seen that, check out mission delivery boards to bring a wide range of voices and talent to the table is, I think, really welcome. But I think we need to go further and we need to go faster, and I've got a couple of suggestions we might get to later to try and help with that. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Will, for those wise and interesting thoughts to begin with. Over to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Well, that was overwhelming, wasn't it? I think you perfectly propped me up, because when I listen to that list and I think of all the other things that could and should be on it, the best way to then generalise that is to look at the statistics. So according to the State of Nature report that was published last September, 1 in 6 species of the British wildlife is threatened with extinction, including 43% of British birds, and I'm sure all of you know that already. It was a very overwhelming and terrifying prospect for an individual taking on that information and listening to Will's list. And at the same time, as just an individual me, I look at this and I just think, oh my goodness, where do I start? Where do I start with the government and where do I start with the public? Because they're faceless. Those two things are faceless. They don't really mean anything. They're just sort of blurry and they just make me feel, I don't know what to do. And that's why I became a campaigner. So 2 years ago, in context, I didn't even know who my own MP was. I didn't know the first thing about politics or anything that my road would lead to and be sat here now. I was just a person listening to the radio, listening to the Gulf Stream collapse and the scientists warning everyone, and hearing these lists and thinking, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And how I decided to act was, I thought, okay, if my house is on fire, which it is, what would I save? And for me, it was swifts, because for loads of reasons, including raising and rewilding a swift, an individual swift, I absolutely love these birds. And the idea of me loving these birds, and then the last swift in England looking at me saying, but Hannah, I thought you loved me. And me saying, but I did. And the swift saying, but you didn't even try. That is why I'm still here 2 years later, asking the government for the simplest urgently essential biodiversity measure in the history of the world to mandate swift bricks. Because without swift bricks, there's no guaranteed nesting habitat for swifts in this country, and there never will be. Pretty obvious. So I feel like when it comes to this election now, and the talk around it, and that absence of nature within the manifestos, and within the individual MPs themselves, we, as people in this room together, who all have a favourite bird, and a reason for that favourite bird, and also maybe mammals and reptiles and amphibians, we must think, okay, we alone cannot take on the government. By the way, I've tried. It's really, really hard. But we can break the government down, and we can break our worries and fears down. And if we can pick one thing that you'll save, one thing that will make you motivated in some way, I think that that's the best thing, because I'm still here. I haven't given up yet, because I fucking love Swifts, and I know they need me really, like, they need me so much. And they also need you, or the hedgehog needs you, or the frog needs you, or the adder needs you. Somebody needs you, and maybe you can have your own way. You don't have to campaign naked like I've done, but you can do something. And so break all that massive list down into something that makes you accountable. Because if you become accountable and a guardian, then think about how the fact that there are 67 million of us here. Then if 67 million of us did that, we would actually win. So no pressure, but I think that's actually quite positive. Amazing.
Thank you, Hannah. That's great. And your energy and inspires many. So happy and really good. James, you've been at the sort of cutting edge of a discussion that has had a big political impact, our rivers and pollution. Where do you think we go next?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making this possible. I haven't been here before. I'm an avid birder, blue tit, answer your question, and very, very, very special species to anyone who's had the pleasure of having one living outside your window and it's greeting them every morning. Anybody in this room, when you went to the ballot box, which we've established earlier, I think you all did any of you consider the state of your rivers, lakes and sea, and how you feel about sewage, agricultural pollution? Could you put your hands up, please? Wow. I feel quite tickled by that. That's amazing. That would not have been the case 5 years ago. It wouldn't have been the case a year ago. And God, that's the first time I've asked that question. That was a bloody good feeling, actually. So there are a few of us who you obviously are aware who have been trying to make some noise about this. You'll be familiar with Fergal Sharkey, no doubt. He was on Good Morning Britain again yesterday telling his story. But actually, this is a story about communities. It's about individuals like us. Our organisation, River Action, is only 14 people. There were none of us 2 years ago. And like Hannah, we felt compelled to do something to try and save our rivers in this particular case. And with that, for me personally, the wildlife comes first. Now, our approach was to find a catchment that was in dire straits, and we chose the River Wye. Can I ask if anybody here lives or anywhere near the Wye? Yes, there's a lady there. There's a few dots around. Okay, so I don't need to tell you what's going on, but for the rest of you, I will. 26,000 tonnes of phosphates a year wash off the fields. There are 7 years of legacy phosphates from manure build-up and fertilising, and that fertiliser comes typically from soy grown from the Amazon rainforest, or what was the Amazon rainforest. It is a global problem. We have a large organisation, Avara, that is effectively exporting its shit. Excuse my language, but I can't talk about poo without saying that. So, what we have here is runoff, agricultural runoff. It is killing the river. Some scientists from Lancaster University reckon we might only have a year or two left before we see entire ecological collapse. The salmon run has pretty much ground to a halt. Birds like kingfishers and swans no longer have, in the case of swans, ranunculus to feed on. And if you know your ecology, you'll know that ranunculus are beautiful, so it's like maiden's hair, one with the white flowers floating on the river. That used to carpet the River Wye. There's none left, hardly any, and that's where all the invertebrates live. That's where all the little fish grow into bigger fish. So we're talking about ecological collapse. What do? Well, we help gather evidence. We tried to find out with the local community, now 700 or 800 citizen scientists, what is the cause of this problem. We then took that to the local politicians, who roundly ignored it, apart from one. All those politicians were blue until a week ago. We fast forward to now, we've taken the government to court. We have literally thousands of people behind this campaign who have said enough, and they have voted for it. So there are now one blue ticket, and the rest are Lib Dems and one green. And that, we are absolutely certain, is because people voted because they care about the environment. They care about nature, of which we are a part. We then look at the River Thames. We have a similar issue, and you'll probably be aware of some of our campaigning around E. coli and the risk to humans, but let's not forget about nature too. Similarly, if you look at the map of the Thames, we've seen overnight the colours of politicians change to a predominantly yellowy orange colour. Now, this is really powerful. It shows that if we have the evidence and we know the source of a problem and we go to the ballot box, we can affect change. The next step is the next 100 days for the new government. And like the other people here, we welcome a new government. I don't care which party it is. Well, I'm glad it isn't the past one because of what's just happened, but I am an independent person, and so is our organisation. But what we do need to see is commitment. We need to see words turn into action. So maybe keep an eye out very soon for announcements that might encourage people to take to the streets towards autumn, let's say, probably the next few days. What we'd like to say to you, all of you, and all your friends and family, is to take messages like this back to your constituencies, to your homes, to your favourite bird watching spot, wherever it is. And remember that rivers and the wildlife that we have sustain everything in our economy. Our food production, our hospitals, our jobs, our schools, everything needs clean water and wildlife. Without that, we are up shit creek without a paddle. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, James. Roger, over to you.
Not for the first time today, I'm going to apologise for not being Mary Colwell. And Mary is deep in her bed, sick with COVID. And she and I think she is the most fantastic campaigner. I campaign for curlews alongside her. And she also campaigns for the GCSE, as you know. I'm a writer, and I've been a soldier, a businessman, but I write about nature, principally birds, a book on shearwaters and a book on the grey partridge. And I write by walking, which sounds rather strange. And in the last 3.5 years, I've walked 10,000 miles around the UK, up and down from Livingston to Cape Wrath and round most of the coast, getting my ideas about the state of our nature by what I see. And so just recently I've seen the evidence of the huge crustacean die-off of the Tees estuary, which you may or may not have heard about. If you haven't, you should. I've seen the ship going into Langston Harbour, and I've seen good stuff as well. But the turning point for me was doing a talk to a very, very privileged girls' school and their teachers and their parents in the middle of Oxfordshire, 500 or 600 of them. And halfway through this talk, I thought I was going to go for it and get active and angsty because I just felt like it. And when you do that, you look at the head teacher and you look for signs like arm crossing and huffing and puffing. And I wasn't getting that, so I went for it further and further and further. And eventually I finished and they clapped. And she walked up to me and I said, look, I really hope I didn't put my foot in it with your little darlings. And she said, absolutely not, you didn't go far enough. These girls are neither sufficiently engaged or enraged. And I take that as a signal for all of us. I think we are all not sufficiently engaged or enraged. And if you look at Mark Avery's book, Reflections, he says at the end that he thinks no more than 600,000 or 700,000 of us in this country, that's less than 1%, are actually fighting for nature. Lots of us are members of NGOs, lots of us are members of conservation bodies, but actually fighting for nature. And one of the reasons, and I know I share Mary's view, is that none of us have successfully made the case that nature isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. And that nature sustains us, we are part of it, we are alongside it, we are not above it. And one of the things I use, particularly when I go around schools, is to say that 50% of the oxygen comes from phytoplankton in the ocean. Every third mouthful you eat is pollinated for free by an insect. Every third pill you eat is plant-based. Look what happened when Chairman Mao killed all the sparrows in 1958. And you see what happens when you mess around with our ecosystem. So I think, for me, one of the biggest things we have to do is show people this isn't a nice to have, this is an absolute must have. When I knew I was going to do this was about 24 hours ago. I actually trawled through for the first time the manifestos of the various governments, various parties. You would not think from that read that we are in the middle of a nature crisis. You really, really would not. I congratulate the Lib Dems because that was one where you would. I mean, the Scottish Nationals had 20 pledges and not one of them even touched on nature. So we have to force our politicians to do this. And I think one of the problems is there are maybe 7 things that are out to get us, but only one of them has got the microphone, and that's climate change. It needs the microphone, but we need to look at it holistically, and everything else, species loss, water quality, air pollution, plastics, all the rest of it needs its share of the microphone so that we look at it holistically. My view is that species loss will kill us before climate change does. Both are extremely serious. So I want that to be high on the agenda as well. A final reason, or a second last reason, is we are nature illiterate, and that has been almost deliberate by governments. And if you make a school nature illiterate, you eventually make a family and a workplace nature illiterate, and then no one ends up discussing nature, and you end up in this mess. All of this is reversible. The final point I'd make, which I think is hugely important, is our food decisions. Last summer I walked for a month from Cape Wrath down to Oban through the Outer Isles, researching for a chapter on farmed salmon, and I thought I knew the half of it, and I didn't. If you start to understand the real cost of the food you buy, then you start making those decisions. So it's up to us as influencers, not fond of that word, but we are, to try and persuade people to make those food decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We've heard from our panel. I'm very keen now to hear from you. So we've got, we've got our box going around. So hands up, anyone who wants to make any points, questions. Let's try and keep the questions quite short, or as a statement quite short, so I want to try and bring the panel in and get as much as we can out of this. So a gentleman on the left there, I think we want to start. Thank you. Thank you. You want to stand up, please, if you don't mind? Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Adam Laidlaw, ex-Greenpeace climate campaigner in COP3 so many years ago. And it's interesting that we're still trying to persuade politicians around the world of the same arguments we aired almost 25 years ago. My question really is about what can we do differently as an environmental ecology lobby group. And as I said, I've worked for Greenpeace, I've worked for Friends of the Earth and other major organisations. Where are they? Where are they in the debate? And how can we, as a collective of NGOs, get together to have a more effective, focused collaboration of the public's view through the collective membership of society's major NGOs. So my question is, and my reflections on, how do we make vocal the silence that we have from WWF, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth and others who could be enormously helpful to this campaign?
Thank you. Will, can I start with you, because you've been around, if you don't mind me saying, the NGO sector for a long time. You've seen all good and bad aspects of it. What would you say in response to that?
Dominic, how rude. Yeah, it's Bourne Free's 40th anniversary this year, so So Adam, we've met, we know each other a little bit, and it's a really good point that you make, and I've been reflecting on this recently and thinking, what can we do that's different? And it was sort of sparked by something Chris Packham said a while back when he said, you know, I've been on every march, I've been on every TV show, I'm, you know, celebrated as a TV presenter, my voice is heard, but it seems to not make any difference. And he did that show, I don't know if any of you saw it, where he questioned whether it was time to break the law. I thought that was quite an interesting philosophical point of view. Don't have to agree with anything that was in the show, but what it made me think was, I wrote it down. So we have all this expertise, all these groups, the ones that Adam's mentioned, many others, and individuals, and what we are is outside of the process. We live outside of the process. We look in and we hope for change, and we fight for access to this minister or that minister with our necessarily narrow agenda. It's a Bourne-free agenda, it's a swift brick agenda, whatever, but it's a necessarily narrow agenda, because you think, I'm only going to get this chance, you know, once every 2 years, and I need to make my mark. However, I think we need to be inside the process. So you're all familiar with the term National Security Council. Almost every country has a National Security Council, and its mandate is to make sure that the nation is safe. That's what it does. I think we need a Nature Security Council, because the biggest single threat, as already been pointed out, is to life on this planet, is the lack of attention to the needs of nature that we all rely on. So I would call on this government to be brave, to be really brave, and to say we're not going to do a them and us anymore. I'm so tired of that expression. When are they going to do something about it? Because it immediately removes the responsibility from us and puts it on someone else. I think it's when are we going to do something about it? And one of the mechanisms I think would work is to bring everybody into the big tent, to have those conversations with government as part of the governing process. So I am calling for the establishment of a Nature Security Council, the best minds, the greatest experience, the most innovative thinking inside the corridors of power to address the crisis, the tri-crisis that threatens all life on Earth. You would then be in the room. You would be part of the mission critical team. And I think that offers a different way forward, because we can't. Who was it? Einstein, wasn't it? Someone like Einstein.
Keep repeating the same mistake.
Yeah, you do the same experiment time and time again, and you think you're going to get a different result. Well, we've been doing this for decades, and we're in as worse a position now as we've ever been. Something needs to change. Let's bring everyone together. It should be a cause that's non-political, that's bipartisan, and that involves you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm going to bring in another question, because I'll try and reflect on individuals on the panel with the strengths in those areas. The lady here, thank you. But thank you for that one.
Speaking to the microphone. I just want to make a comment on what we've just heard, which is it's not easy to take on the vested interests. They have enormous resources. They control most of the media. They control us in ways that we don't necessarily understand still, and we can't just sort of go on marches and do all the rest of it. We have to be savvy. We have to work out how we can take them on. And if you get too close to them, as countries have found that have tried to prevent the use of chemical fertilizers, not fertilizers, insect repellents and pesticides. Thank you. They'll take them to all the courts they can take them through and sue them. So we've got to. We can be passionate, but we've also got to be incredibly wise and find out how underhand they can be and how we can counteract their tactics.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Hello, Adam. Adam's married to my cousin. Nice to see you. I've forgotten you were coming. It's a nice surprise. We're in an emergency here, and I didn't see, apart from Green's a little bit of yellow voice, no mention of climate breakdown, no mention of ecological collapse. I mean, the election completely and utterly ignored the fact we're walking to hell in environmental terms, and that means an unsustainable future for us, our children, our grandchildren. The vested interests that the ladies just mentioned are paramount to this, and this includes the NGO sector. Now, I'm very proud and pleased to be able to say that River Action works with all the main NGOs and the smaller ones and the community groups, and we intend to continue doing that in perpetuity as long as it's needed. We're in it together. However, we must do this with our eyes open. There are, for example, in my sector, water companies funding most of the organisations that I work with to try and campaign. That's a vested interest that's compromised, and that is going to cause conflict of interest too, isn't it? When you come to the food production world, building industry, the world that Hannah occupies, of course, there are so many vested interests. But ultimately, I'm sad to say it, but it's a bit like the war. It wasn't until the bombs started raining down that we actually dug for victory and started behaving properly as a community. So I don't want to sound disheartening, but as we see species collapse and those affect us as human beings, as we see the health of rivers decline and affect us and our neighbours and our family and friends who get sick and so on, that's when we tend to react. So my gut feeling with this, sadly, is that we're going to see a bit more of things getting really shit, and then we'll probably start to wake up. But even then, those vested interests are so powerful, they will dumb down, as they have done for decades, and tell us everything's okay.
Yeah, it's a good point. Hannah, can I just bring you in quickly on this? Because, you know, you're an example, you remind me of me in some ways. That's a good or bad thing.
That's very flattering.
You know, for those of you who don't know about my background, I worked in the corporate industry. So I was a very highly paid lobbyist in the food industry, plant science, pesticide industry. I did it all. I got prime ministers to do things that I regretted that had an impact on the environment, not in a good way, but I was paid a lot of money to do that. So I know exactly what you do to get ministers and prime ministers and others to do things if you're a powerful industry lobby. I turned my back on that over 15 years ago to become a more poorly paid voice for the environment. But what I did learn is that you can take the skills of what you had in government and the corporate lobby world and then put them into being a voice for animals. That doesn't always make you popular, and often you find you get countries and organizations coming after you because you are speaking up for things. But Hannah, you're an example of someone with similar passions at times that I've had, where you just drive yourself forward and you use every opportunity to get on the streets, to get into the media. And you're one person, but you've had a big impact. What's that taught you about how individuals just feeling passionate and angry can make a difference?
I think there's a saying, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Yeah. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're freaked out and you have eco-anxiety or you're really, really pissed off. It doesn't matter what the emotion is, but as long as you have an emotion, you can fuel that. And that obviously sounds really naive because we're all sitting here caring and maybe we're trying really hard. And two things I've learned as a campaigner. One is regulatory capture, that I'm sure you can condense, but this is what you're talking about. Actually, in some ways, voting for any of our political parties is a disaster because they're all under the same thumb, and that freaks me out because I didn't know it until I started getting into the horrible game of treacle that is negotiating with somebody who's sitting there saying that they are making the decisions, but under the table they're actually being prodded around by the massive corporate billionaire pound pesticide companies. And Dominic and James have told me that. I did not know that because until these guys told me that, and that's terrifying because I don't really know how to fix that other than to at least be aware of it so that you don't think, oh, well, that's a brilliant political party, or well done. It's like bullshit. They're all under the thumb. They're not doing any good for nature. They're just pretending they are. So we need to see action, and the question is, how can we make that happen? I don't know the answer. I wish I did, but I would be the unique one in the room if I knew the answer, I think. Yeah. But so I don't know.
Your passion and energy has made a difference to the way people see your campaign.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. So like the list said, all the other things on all the manifestos, and nature wasn't even in it, and then you've got climate jostling with biodiversity loss, and then you've got Swiftbricks jostling with animal welfare and river action, and who do you pick, or which one should get in, and I'm thinking, oh no, I need to plug mandating Swiftbricks and not insect decline, even though insect decline is massively, hugely affecting swifts. But I've got to pick one battle because I've learned that I have to ask one question and pick one battle. That's the only way I can survive with my point, right? But then you've got everybody around me in the room doing the same thing for something else. And so then we compete against each other. And the one thing I have learned is that there's this brilliant coalition organisation called Wildlife and Countryside Link, of which 82 NGOs are a part of. And that's a really interesting one for more public to understand, because the NGOs actually also compete against each other, and that's really counterproductive. And so having a coalition, so whether it is your idea with the Nature Security Alliance, not quite sure what you said, but something like that, Wildlife and Countryside Link is a good intermediate for that, because at least you can go to one place and see all the different things, and you have to pick your passion because that's how we survive, but we've got to work out how to work together, because otherwise we're just competing against each other.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you in a minute, Roger, but I want to take another question from the audience. I'm sure these from you can touch on. Can I just pass it around again, thank you. Please. I can't hear you, sorry. Is it working?
Yeah, it's on now. A couple of you have kind of spoken about nature and climate crises as though they were separate issues, and I think part of the strategy here is understand, without being patronising, understanding they are two sides of the same coin. So there's probably a gambit there to play on the back of the growing interest in the climate emergency, that the causes of that are the same as the causes of the nature crises. You can probably tell from my accent I'm from Wales, and positively, optimistically in Wales we do have some useful legislation which also plays to the social agenda, the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. And my experience involved in that is that public bodies certainly, and some of the NGOs, recognise that nature underpins our human future well-being. So there's some optimism there, but clearly some way to go. So not so much a question, but more of a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, not at all. Roger, quickly, because you brought that up, didn't you? The need to connect these two. They're not.
Yeah, I think sort of really looking at all three questions. I think one of the surprising things is we are by a country mile the country with the highest membership of conservation organisations in the world, and yet we have one of the worst records on nature in the world. And I think those are tied. There's an entire logic in that. Is we all join lots of things to make us feel better, and that includes political parties. Remember, Liz Truss was wished on us by 68,500 people for a country of 68 million people. So my feeling is you should join less organisations, but put your heart and soul and shoulder into the ones you join. My neighbour, one of my neighbours, is a member of about 16 things, and she does it because she can, and everything else. And then she complains that the councils make these decisions, and I said, just join one, give it as much money as you can, give it as much of your time as you can, and don't complain if you haven't voted for the council or whoever it is. And the same applies with politics. You know, I join political parties when I want to have a dog in the fight next time they change a leader. So it's all about becoming more genuinely activist, but to do so with focus. At the moment, we spray it around and we get cross, and we feel better by getting cross. I would pick up one thing on the Future Generations Act, which is wonderful, but it's the future generations of humans. And it would be lovely to see an act that actually talks about the future generation of everything, because then we're putting ourselves on that level. So my thing would be just focus your efforts like Hannah has, and really, really get stuck in.
Thank you. More questions, please. Thank you. 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Rick Cousins. I come from a scientific background, and one of the challenges we face with the government is the civil service is actually very poorly trained in science, and I imagine this must also be the case with respect to nature. So one of the approaches is how can we improve just the innate knowledge within the civil service, because they are the ones that are going to support whatever government is in power. And secondly, you know, governments work on very short time frames because that's how they get elected. What objectives can we set them within the next 4 years that they can really latch on to deliver to gain their support going forward?
Good question. Well, do you want to sort of, what do you do with, you know, this problem you have of short-termism in politics, where, you know, most politicians can't see beyond the next election or the next sort of 12 months, yet a lot of the problems we face are going to take real planning and thought. And you've talked about bringing more people into the tent, making it like a national security priority.
Yeah.
We're talking about changing the way government works effectively, don't we, to deal with these problems?
We are, and I agree. I mean, absolutely, you're right. You've identified really important deficits in our ability to manage a situation simply because we don't have capacity and we don't have trained people, which again slightly goes to my point about a Nature Security Council, which could be augmented by the appointment of a nature commissioner who would be responsible for looking across all departments of government and looking for the joined up writing, sitting at cabinet level, looking across all departments of government to make sure that we have joined up writing when it comes to prioritising nature. Can I pick up on just a couple of quick things? These are not well-formed thoughts. But firstly, you know, I am what is classified as male, pale and stale, right. If you haven't heard that before. And I think we need to listen, and not just listen, but learn from 2 generations down from me. So my dear mum, who's 93, is still on the board of Born Free. But we also have Bella Lack, who's 21, who's on the board of Born Free. We need to bring that generation into positions of influence and power to help us understand, so that my perception of the world, which is on its way out, is actually informed by the perception of a generation who looks forward to the next 40 years, fingers crossed, and makes it happen. Secondly, with regard to Link, I've talked about the Nature Security Council idea to Richard Benwell, and he's going, I quite like that idea, so I feel like I've got a slight thumbs up. Next, governments have choices that they can make. The future is not set in some kind of stone, nor is it set necessarily by what's in the manifesto. Things change, the world changes. Look at what Costa Rica in the tent, probably just over there, look at what Costa Rica's done. And I'm not saying we would need to necessarily all do all this, but no army, no zoos, no circuses, no extractive industry, no trophy hunting, 40% more tree cover since 1978. That's a choice that we can make. Last thing I've got so many things I want to say. Two more things. We do need experts. Don't listen to Michael Gove.
Don't listen to Michael Gove.
We do need experts, because experts have spent, hopefully, their lives trying to understand something and bring perspective to a discussion to those civil servants who maybe move between one department. I'll tell you this, I once was responding to a gentleman who was heading up the UK delegation to CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. He'd come from the vehicle licensing department in Wales at the time. I don't know where it is now, but that was his background. Why on earth would he understand anything about wildlife trade regulation? And finally, I'm keen that we don't always ascribe a value to wildlife in these terms. So when someone says timber, I say tree, because timber is the product that we have then commoditized, which we then sell, which we make into toilet seats or window surrounds. The tree has a whole series of other values, and I am working with a former director of the IMF on this, if we can ascribe asset value to nature by leaving it alone, then we will be able to persuade many people that there is a business model that's worth developing that just respects nature for all the ecosystem services that it provides every single one of us.
Thank you. I'm going to use this question as the last statement for each of you, because I'm going to bring this to a close. So on to you, Hannah, just to reflect. Obviously, Will's picked up on some big things. If you were changing the way government works from your experience, what do you think you'd put right?
I don't know how to answer that. I'll answer my own version. So I've learned through being one solo, unfunded, really stressed out campaigner that I have to rely on people. So I had 9,896 people sign my petition. That's amazing. I couldn't get to the Parliament next stage without those 110,000 people. Now I'm in Parliament, knocking on all the different doors. I have to have political allies. What I've learned is that the MPs that aren't my allies, like Zach Goldsmith, who I would follow forever, but he's the exception, not the rule. The rule is the only ones that will do anything, if you're not Zach Goldsmith, is if enough people badger them about it. So, for example, I've got my stuff down here, I've got a postage stamp fund, and I've also got blank letters and cards and loads of pens. I need your help right now. Well, I don't need it, the Swifts need it. And I know that if all of you wrote a letter to one man, not Michael Gove anymore, hopefully he's not here forever, but Matthew Pennycook, the housing minister, if every single one of you wrote today to Matthew Pennycook, there's a much better chance of Swifts. And that is a maquette for everything else. If we all use all of our passion and fuel to direct one thing first and then the next thing, quality over quantity, then we can make a massive change. We really need to realise the power of ourselves.
Yeah, it's a good point. And so that's a call to arms, isn't it? We want everyone in this room to be writing to the Housing Minister on behalf of Hannah and her campaign.
Come and find me afterwards, I've got pens.
Yeah,
everything.
no excuses, so we want it all to pile in. Over to you.
Well, we've seen what could happen with a COVID crisis, which obviously has been tragic for many, many families, perhaps people in the room. And we saw that it could happen instantaneously overnight. We gave up our liberty without questioning it. We took drugs that hadn't been tested without questioning it, many of us. And we changed our entire lifestyle, our way of relating to each other. We also allowed the government to give billions of pounds that could have been spent on many other things, including the subjects we're talking about today, to, dare I say it, criminals. So Which is the case. So we have many criminal prosecutions are going to be going ahead very soon because of the fast track process and so on. We know governments can act when there is an actual emergency that they perceive as existential. That is what needs to happen now. As I said earlier on, though, I suspect that until we really are hit in this country by a freak hurricane or whatever it is that's going to be so significant and it affect our economy, I don't think we're going to see a massive amount of change. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop. And we shouldn't continue working together. And then secondly, you mentioned earlier, Will, the phrase inside track and outside track. As an organisation, and I would encourage all of you to work both with rage and love at the problem, and take to the streets, write to your local MP, whatever it is that you care about, join as I'm sure you all are, members of whatever wildlife group and so on, so act through that. But also, as we try and do, maintain a balance of respect. One of the reasons why our organisation's in the media a lot, and that we're privy to conversations behind closed doors and open doors, is because we're quite polite. And although I might swear a bit, and I might have a bit of a go at the odd politician and my colleagues too, but we do it generally with humour and goodwill. So we have to work together. Whether we like a government or not, locally or nationally, we must work together. And if we can try and encourage them, as we do, to feel this sense of urgency is existential, then we might just about start turning things around.
Thank you very much. Roger?
I think if you can't improve the silence, don't talk. I think what you've all said is absolutely right, but I'm a Sagittarian, so I think the one thing I would like to see us do is try and depoliticise nature. These things are just far too important. You can't solve them on a 5-year electoral cycle. That's part of the problem, is that as soon as the government gets in, it has about a year and then it's worrying about the next election. And somehow we have to find a way of doing that. I think the writing to your MP, show of hands, how many of you have written to your MP in the last year? Oh, wow. Oh, that's good. Because actually, I have a very, very hardline Conservative MP. A lot of us write to him. He actually gets things done. So that person is paid to serve you, make them. And the final thing, which has got nothing to do with politics, but vote with your wallet. You are never more powerful than when you were in the aisle of a supermarket. And you aren't just powerful once every 5 years, you're powerful every time you go shopping.
Very true. Thank you so much. Just a few final thoughts from me as we close. I think, as I said earlier, I've worked on both sides of the debate. So I have been in the lobbying world for big corporations, and I know how they do influence governments to take decisions that are not often in the interest of the environment or biodiversity. But there are ways that we can deal with that. I think the government is our government, whatever we might think about it. You've talked about just engaging with MPs. Well, every email you send, every letter, and letters are still worth sending.
Letters are better.
Yes, they are, because they can have more impact if you put them in the post. Do register a concern that then goes up the line to the party leaders as well, and the Prime Minister if they are just monitoring what's being thought about in the country at large. And that's why rivers and the pollution issues that you've been dealing with, James, have become so political. Because you got it right to the political priority agenda, and you influence the outcome of an election for the first time probably in British history on a key environmental issue. That means we can do it again, and we should do it again. But we have massive challenges too. One thing I would finish with is that we also have a huge technological revolution going on. Artificial intelligence is something I've been working on with regards to tech companies and the environment over the last 12 months. I spent some time in America just before Christmas chairing a summit, bringing tech leaders together to look at some of the environmental issues. I came away from that thinking that actually artificial intelligence will change all our lives in this room in a very short period of time. In many ways, AI is probably going to be more revolutionary than Stephenson's rocket and the steam engine, the industrial revolution that changed life on this planet. And it will change it more quickly. And that's going to throw up a lot of concerns about regulation and control and jobs. But there's also some vital potential benefits there, where this technology might allow us to do things in relation to how we use the natural resources of this planet, how we monitor species, how we monitor habitats, how we protect them, even how we communicate with species. Just think about that for a moment. We might not be that far away from being able to communicate with whales. God knows what they would tell us if we could communicate with them. But that in itself will throw up a lot of ethical concerns. But we're not the only intelligent species on this planet. We're not the dominant species that has the right to destroy everything. We basically have to cohabit and protect this earth for every life form that we share it with. That's a big responsibility on the human race. But we're beginning to get to a point in technological terms where we'll unlock that. And I hope the next generation, young people growing up today in what will be a very uncertain world, harnessing that technology and the ideas and drive that we see in this room, and we've seen actually at BirdFair for decades, which is why this is such a great gathering, can really begin to fundamentally change how we do business, how we do politics, how we live our lives every day to protect what's left of this precious planet, not just for people, but for all the natural world we share it with. So that's a massive challenge. But I hope today you all come away a little bit more optimistic. We've had an election, we have brought about some change, but there are far more battles to come. So let's just have a round of applause for our panel. Thank you all.